Hey everyone, I'm going through the history of the Teen Titans franchise one era at a time. Today we're looking at an era of the Wolfman Perez run called Tales of the Teen Titans. So be sure to subscribe to our channel so you can check out the rest of this series and other videos on comics new and old. Tales of the Teen Titans was the name of the series when it was rebranded following issue number 40, and this ran all the way until issue 59. Additionally, an annual came out around this time, so this review pretty much covers all those books, taking us right up to the point of the Crisis of Infinite Earths. It's a fun time for Teen Titans as DC on the whole was transitioning into this more modern take on its own universe. Given how Wolfman and Perez were behind the Crisis itself, it shouldn't be a large surprise that Teen Titans kind of set the tone for that larger crossover and the general direction the entire company was heading towards during the 1980s. It's very easy to glean why they were becoming such a creative force at the company from reading these books. By this point in Titans history, everything is robustly polished and feels like it has this strong sense of direction that makes it nearly pitch perfect. The most famous story to come out of this time period is the Judas Contract, a story where Tara reveals to the Teen Titans something we as the audience had already been told some time ago, that she was actually a traitor and had been working with Deathstroke this whole time. It's a pretty brutal story and a strong one in terms of the novelty of the plot point. Introducing a fun character who has a ton of potential on the team only to reveal her as a dangerous enemy was relatively groundbreaking at this point for superhero teams, and the story largely still holds up because of it. Where it gets weaker is Tales of the Teen Titans implies a romantic relationship between Tara and Deathstroke. What is meant to be a shocking moment gets blunted by the sexual politics of consent due to the enormous difference in age and status between these two, in a way that doesn't add enough to the story to justify such a striking twist. This is made worse by the growing presence of a new romantic interest for Donna Troy in the form of Terry Long, a much older professor that looks oddly and uncomfortably similar to Marv Wolfman as he did in the 1980s. It reeks of being a self-insert fantasy more than anything abusive, with all the clean-slated, infallible traits that accompany Terry Long, and to me, one of the most obvious examples of what people these days would call a Mary Sue character. Together, these relationships signal the absolute weakest parts of Tales of the Teen Titans. For all the positive and wonderful aspects of this particular era of Titans history, and as important as these books are in shaping the team into what it is today, there is a dark and uncomfortable side to this particular era of the books. Now, over the years, I've softened on this a little bit. Wolfman's writing comes across a lot more as harmless, relatively innocent thirst than it does as some sort of creepy power dynamic thing going on. But it's also very difficult to read these books and not think about how, well, yes, there are professors out there that manipulate their students into sexual favors, and a lot of older men like Slade Wilson that do way worse things to young women like Tara. The real world chafes heavily against the more innocent interpretation of these comics, even if that more innocent interpretation largely holds up based on what we know about Marv Wolfman. Now, it's worth reflecting on a few key bits of information here. This is all part of a larger set of themes going on within these books. Tales of the Teen Titans explores ideas of drug addiction, sex trafficking, modern warfare, and other very serious topics. George Perez, reflecting these darker themes, used a more refined set of art that was finally able to upgrade Dick Grayson into his first Nightwing costume, showcasing the ever-increasingly mature themes that the writers were delving into with this series. The vast majority of this stuff, in my opinion, is well done and properly handled. These books ask some very big questions and explore some very difficult ideas, and while they certainly don't have all the answers to societal ills, they do a great job at expressing the human experience of these topics. So, I don't feel they stick the landing completely when it comes to how some of these relationships are handled. In a couple of situations, the series is largely successful at exploring these darker themes and treading new ground for superhero comics. In that context, the relationship stuff makes a little more sense, and it's a little more excusable that it comes across as a little creepy almost 40 years after the fact. And so, yes, some of the stuff around Deathstroke and Terry Long very much reads as dated and mishandled. It is easy to excuse and understand when you have these stories that are trying so much and accomplishing quite a bit in about 20 issues. It helps that the whole thing is quite the achievement in art. The books, and indeed most books by Perez, just have this sort of effortless quality to them. They look beautiful and are so full of life, even in the most mundane of panels. And that isn't to say that they are effortless. The man is so good at his job, and at this point in time, so on point with his craft, that he makes these very carefully made images look like they took him no work at all. He's so talented that he makes it look like he could draw these books in his sleep, and it's very impressive. It's such a sign of a real professional because I don't doubt for a second in reality that Tales of the Teen Titans doesn't represent a Herculean level of effort and craftsmanship. This pretty much goes for Marv Wolfman too, and in spite of the issues I've talked about with his writing, like Perez, by this point in time he not only really figured out how to write Teen Titans well, also he really did it in a way that perfectly complemented the art style of George Perez and what his artistic partner was capable of. The two hit their stride in this point in the series, and in many ways, they're at their peak of creative synergy in their entire careers, right here in these books. This era isn't the end of these two working together for the Teen Titans, but it is the last one where they work together this well for the entire time, and even by the end, you can see a little bit of a drift happening as time wore on. These two told their stories and changed Teen Titans forever, but that creative energy needed a reset at some point. Luckily, it would come almost immediately in the form of Crisis of Infinite Earths, where the two worked together on an even more legendary story that changed DC history forever. For the Teen Titans, it meant that they would return in yet another new era, New Teen Titans Volume 2, which we'll get into next round. With all that's in mind, there is a bittersweet quality to Tales of the Teen Titans. As the series wraps up and characters like Jericho increasingly take center stage, I think the writing was kind of on the wall for the outstanding quality of this series coming to an end, as well as George Perez and Marv Wolfman's time working together. It was never going to last forever, so it's not the end of the world, but it is one of the hardest parts in reading this series, knowing that all these entertaining adventures and all this great fun is going to have to come to a very abrupt end. Though that sort of undermines this era and what it achieved. George Perez worked on this series for years, and it makes sense that in the eras to follow, he would gradually be stepping back from the Teen Titans. Though Marv Wolfman would stick around, things would never quite be the same, and it's hard to fault either individual for not being able to maintain the same level of creative energy for a full decade. It's one of the nicer compliments I can pay Tales of the Teen Titans, really, that it's so great it feels it goes by too quickly. Almost as suddenly as this golden era of Teen Titans arrives, it very quickly fades into something just not quite as impressive as what came before. Tales of the Teen Titans is one of the better examples of storytelling in comic book history that, at this point, grew past some of the more off-kilter elements of the art from the new Teen Titans days. Because of that, there's a certain fidelity to these comics, a sense of complete, top-to-bottom quality that even the earlier Wolfman-Perez books lacked, where everything not only worked well on its own, but with each other to create something that wouldn't be there if we were going by just writing or art alone. It's a real creative partnership, one of the best in comic book history, and because of that, it comes together into something that, in my opinion, represents peak Teen Titans storytelling to this day. With a relativistic grading system, we have officially used up the only 2 A+s I'm going to be giving out for this series. Though it might not be a surprise to many, the Wolfman and Perez era of Teen Titans comics very much holds up to this day as the all-time greatest series of comics in Teen Titans history. Yes, while this era suffers from some self-insertion writing habits that don't hold up well at all, that stuff feels minor, pretty easily to contextualize, and just not that creepy or bad enough to derail what works for this series. Tales of the Teen Titans would do a few things for this team that I feel make it so essential and valuable as a series of books, even beyond its own intrinsic quality. It is here that I feel the team became cemented as a permanent, ongoing part of the DC universe, rather than what it was before, which was a series of temporary experiments, really. This era and New Teen Titans very much inspired virtually every take on the Titans that would follow, for better or worse. And the stories told here pretty much form the identity people have with what this team is about, in a way that would inspire generations to come. Next up, the Wolfman and Perez era officially comes to an end, but Marv Wolfman will continue writing the series with New Teen Titans Volume 2, the last time he worked with Perez in any sort of ongoing form for the Teen Titans books. We'll get into what that series does and its overall grade relative to the rest of Teen Titans history next time on Comic Island.